Elara stepped into the office lobby just as the last of the staff were leaving, the echo of their shoes fading down the hallway, leaving her with an unexpected stillness that pressed against her chest like a quiet warning. She hadn't planned to stay long. Noah, her husband, had left behind a stack of important documents, and she only intended to drop them off, sign a quick smile to the receptionist, and leave before anyone noticed. The office, usually bustling with energy, felt strangely empty, almost intimate in its silence, and she felt a shiver run down her spine as she walked toward Noah's department, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every instinct in her told her to hurry, to keep the visit short, yet a subtle pull urged her to pause, to notice the dim glow of desk lamps casting long shadows that danced gently across the walls. She passed rows of vacant cubicles, each one telling its own story of hours spent hunched over screens, of late nights and whispered conversations that were never meant for her ears. Elara's fingers brushed against the papers in her hands, smooth and familiar, and for a moment, she imagined Noah hunched over these same pages, head bowed in concentration, unaware that she was standing here, that she was stepping into a space usually reserved for him. When she reached Marcus Hale's office, the thought of the man behind the name, her husband's boss, a figure of calm authority, someone whose voice carried respect and whose gaze rarely lingered unnecessarily, made her hesitate. She had met him only a handful of times, exchanged polite greetings, and witnessed the way he treated Noah with professional courtesy, almost fatherly in its guidance, yet there was always a distance, a boundary she had never crossed. Today, though, something about the stillness of the office, the way the air hung heavy with the scent of polished wood and faint coffee, made her pause at his door, hand hovering over the handle, wondering if she should knock or simply leave the papers on his desk. Before she could decide, the door opened slightly, and Marcus himself appeared, his presence both familiar and startling, the quiet authority in his posture softened by something unreadable in his eyes. "Elara," he said, and the single word, simple as it was, carried weight she hadn't anticipated, a subtle warmth and an undertone that suggested the ordinary rules of office decorum were suspended for this brief, unexpected moment. She forced a polite smile, handing over the documents, and he thanked her in his measured tone, yet something lingered between them, something unspoken, a current of tension that made her pulse quicken without warning. Marcus closed the door softly behind her, and the click of the lock sounded louder than it should have, marking the sudden shift from routine professionalism to something more intimate, more vulnerable. He gestured for her to sit, and though she hesitated, she obeyed, settling into the chair across from his desk, feeling the unfamiliar weight of solitude pressing around them. The room, dimly lit and quiet except for the faint hum of electronics in the background, seemed to shrink around them, making every movement, every glance, every tiny sound feel amplified. Elara's thoughts raced. Why was he asking her to stay? Why was the office empty when this visit was supposed to be a brief, simple task? Her heart thudded in her chest as she considered turning to leave, yet something, a curious mixture of caution and intrigue, rooted her to the spot. Marcus didn't speak immediately, he merely looked at her, his expression calm but inscrutable, and the silence stretched long enough for her imagination to fill the space with possibilities she hadn't expected to consider. He finally broke the quiet, his voice low, careful, carrying a softness that contrasted sharply with the firm authority she had always associated with him. He said there was something he needed to tell her, something he hadn't shared with anyone else, and the words landed like a stone in her chest, sending ripples through her thoughts. Elara's mind spun, trying to rationalize the situation. This was her husband's boss, a man she respected, a figure who should never blur the lines between professional and personal. Yet here he was, alone with her in an empty office, offering to reveal something meant only for her ears. She felt a mixture of apprehension and strange anticipation, a cocktail of curiosity, fear, and the flutter of emotions she hadn't expected to encounter in a corporate office on an ordinary evening. Her pulse raced as she glanced around the room, noticing the small details she had never paid attention to before, the way his desk was organized meticulously, the framed certificates on the wall reflecting the soft glow of the desk lamp, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the aroma of coffee lingering in the air, and even the subtle way his eyes met hers, steady but hesitant, as if measuring the weight of the conversation to come. Marcus's presence was both grounding and disarming. He exuded calm, yet there was a vulnerability in the way he held his gaze, a hesitation that told her this was not just a casual remark, not just idle chatter. The air seemed charged, thick with meaning, yet silent enough that even a whisper could feel like a shout. Elara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the intensity of the moment, from the strange intimacy of being trusted with something she could not yet understand, from the knowledge that this conversation, however brief, would linger in her mind far beyond the office walls. She tried to steady her breathing, to focus on the practical matter that had brought her here, reminding herself that Noah's papers were the purpose of this visit, not any other unexpected drama. Yet the moment Marcus leaned slightly forward, hands folded on the desk, and began speaking in a voice that was soft yet deliberate, the words she hadn't yet heard carrying a weight she could already feel, she realized that this night, this quiet, ordinary evening, would mark a turning point she had not anticipated. Her heart pounded not from fear but from the awareness that life, in its quiet, unpredictable way, sometimes presented moments that could not be ignored, moments where the ordinary bled into the extraordinary, and where the human heart revealed depths that no schedule, no meeting, no professional boundary could ever contain. And in that suspended silence, before a single secret was spoken, before a single revelation was made, Elara knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that something inside her was shifting, that this encounter would leave a mark on her, delicate but permanent, and that whatever Marcus was about to reveal would change her understanding of loyalty, love, and the quiet, aching complexity of the human heart. She shifted slightly in her chair, glancing at him once more, noting the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, the slight furrow in his brow, the careful way he chose his words even before he spoke, and realized that this was a man balancing honesty with restraint, courage with fear, and that the story he was about to share would not be simple, would not be neat, but would be profoundly human. The quiet hum of the office seemed to pause along with her thoughts, the distant city lights outside the window reflecting in her eyes, mirroring the storm of curiosity, apprehension, and something else, something she could not yet name, that stirred quietly, persistently, in her chest. And just as her mind began to spiral with questions she was not ready to ask, Marcus's voice finally cut through the silence, calm but weighted, gentle but urgent. "Elara, there's something I need you to know. Something I've never told anyone before." The words, simple yet powerful, held the entire room captive. Elara's breath caught, and for the first time that evening, she felt the fragile thrill of anticipation, the delicate tension of a secret waiting to unfold, and the unmistakable awareness that the world as she knew it might quietly, irrevocably shift from this very moment onward. Elara's chest tightened as Marcus's words hung in the air, a gentle weight pressing against her thoughts, and she tried to steady herself, gripping the edge of her chair while the hum of the office and the distant city lights outside seemed to fade into a background haze, leaving only the two of them suspended in a fragile, intimate bubble of anticipation. Marcus leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers, calm yet vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected, and for a long moment, he said nothing, letting the silence stretch, giving space for both of them to feel the gravity of the moment. Elara's mind raced, flitting between loyalty to Noah, curiosity about Marcus, and the strange, unexplainable pull she felt in her chest, a fluttering she tried to dismiss as nothing more than exhaustion or the thrill of being somewhere she shouldn't be. But deep down, she knew it was more complicated, more human, more impossible to ignore. Then, in a voice that was low but deliberate, Marcus began, telling her not about work, not about schedules or meetings or deadlines, but about truth, personal truth, quietly kept, yet heavy enough to demand release. He spoke of admiration, of noticing the warmth she carried, the quiet strength in her demeanor, the way her presence could brighten a room without a single word, and Elara felt her heart beat faster, her stomach tightening in a mix of awe and unease, because his words were neither flirtation nor threat, they were recognition, a human acknowledgement of something she had never heard before. He admitted that over time, through shared meetings, brief exchanges, and passing smiles, he had grown to care in a way that transcended the ordinary boundaries of professional life, that what he felt was not reckless, but sincere, and that the weight of keeping it secret had begun to press on him unbearably. Elara's mind spun, torn between shock and a quiet ache she could not name, because while she loved Noah dearly, she could not deny the loneliness that had quietly settled into their routine, the small gaps in attention, the moments of absence, the space between them that had grown over time like shadows creeping across the walls. Marcus's confession was not dramatic or brash. It was gentle, honest, and utterly human, and it hit her not as temptation but as a reflection, a mirror held up to her own unspoken feelings and fears. She felt warmth in her chest and an unfamiliar stirring in her mind, a recognition of what she had long ignored, the quiet longing for connection, for being truly seen and understood, even amidst the life she had built with Noah. Marcus's eyes softened as he continued, explaining that he did not wish to disrupt her marriage, that he had no expectations, and that he only wanted her to hear the truth because secrets, when kept too long, could corrode the heart, could weigh on the soul, could create unseen fractures in lives otherwise thought secure. Ilara's fingers clenched slightly, her nails pressing into her palms, as she realized the gravity of what he was sharing, not a demand, not a confession meant to tempt, but a truth meant to unburden, to give clarity, to remind her that emotions, even those inconvenient or untimely, were not inherently wrong, only human. She shifted in her chair, letting the words sink in, noticing the subtle tension in Marcus's posture, the careful way he chose his phrases, the way he seemed to hold back more than he revealed, and she sensed the honesty in his restraint, the quiet courage it must have taken to voice something so vulnerable in the empty office, late in the evening when no one else could witness it. And yet, despite the careful, measured way he spoke, Ilara felt the intensity of the moment coil around her heart like a thread she could neither pull away from nor ignore, because Marcus's words were gentle, romantic in a restrained, mature way, and they made her feel seen in a manner she hadn't realized she craved, a recognition of her inner world without expectation or demand. The room seemed to shrink further, the hum of electronics fading into silence as she listened, her mind tracing every nuance, every inflection, every pause, and in those moments, she felt the complexity of human emotion, the way longing could exist quietly beneath the surface of daily life, unspoken yet powerful, capable of stirring a heart without a single overt action. She thought of Noah, and love mingled with guilt, because she loved him and yet understood, perhaps for the first time, that love could sometimes be quiet, taken for granted, leaving spaces for longing and unacknowledged desire to seep in unnoticed. Marcus's voice continued, carefully threading his words through the space between them, his honesty both a balm and a jolt, acknowledging admiration, connection, and respect without overstepping, and she felt herself responding not with temptation but with empathy, with understanding, with a profound awareness that the human heart could feel multiple truths at once, loyalty, care, admiration, and even yearning for recognition, all blending into one delicate, emotional moment. The city lights outside reflected off the polished surfaces of the office, dancing across their faces as he spoke, and in the glow, Ilara saw the sincerity etched into his features, the small crease near his eyes when he smiled faintly, the tension in his jaw as he carefully avoided saying more than necessary, the quiet steadiness in his gaze that told her he was placing trust in her alone, a silent offering that carried weight and responsibility. She felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and gentle sadness, because what he was sharing was not selfish, it was human, a reminder that feelings do not always follow convenience or logic, that connection cannot be dictated by rules alone, and that sometimes, the quiet acknowledgement of another person's truth could illuminate corners of her own heart she had ignored for far too long. As Marcus's voice softened further, admitting that he had long admired her composure, her kindness, and the subtle way she moved through the world with grace, Ilara felt tears welling at the edge of her eyes, not from shame or guilt, but from the raw poignancy of being seen, of having someone recognize not just her outward life but the inner currents she had kept hidden, the emotional labor she had quietly carried, the longing she had brushed aside as ordinary. She realized that the moment was not about temptation or moral conflict, it was about awareness, about understanding that the human heart is not simple, and that emotions, honest, heartfelt, and carefully contained, could exist in parallel with commitment, respect, and love. Marcus paused, giving her space to absorb the words, and in that pause, Ilara felt the weight of possibility, not in terms of choice or action, but in terms of clarity, reflection, and emotional awakening, As if the confession had opened a window she hadn't realized was sealed, allowing her to see herself, her marriage, and her life with new eyes, full of nuance, longing, and quiet reflection. She noticed the subtle shifts in her own breathing, the way her hands trembled slightly, the soft ache in her chest, and the awareness that she would never forget this moment, not because it changed her actions, but because it revealed her heart, her emotional truth, her capacity to feel deeply, entirely, and without pretense. And though the office remained silent, though the city lights continued their distant shimmer, and though Marcus's words had been gentle and careful, Elara felt the intensity of the night, the intimacy of shared human vulnerability, and the undeniable emotional resonance that lingered between them, a gentle, mature tension that spoke of unspoken understanding, quiet respect, and the soft, aching beauty of human connection, reminding her that life was never simple, love was never simple, and that sometimes, the most profound moments were the ones where hearts were seen, honored, and understood. Without expectation or judgment, leaving her with a delicate, lingering awareness that the night, the confession, and the quiet honesty of Marcus Hale would remain etched in her memory, shaping the way she viewed herself, her marriage, and the tender, complicated world of human emotion that continued to swirl around her, unseen yet palpably felt, as she sat there listening, absorbing, and quietly reflecting on the fragile, beautiful truth he had entrusted to her, a truth that would resonate far beyond the walls of that empty office, far beyond the glow of city lights, and deep into the quiet chambers of her own heart. Elara rose from her chair, feeling the sudden need to move, to stretch, to remind herself that she was still standing in an office, in the real world, yet every step she took seemed to echo louder than it should in the empty space, the soft click of her heels against the polished floor marking each heartbeat she could no longer ignore as her mind raced with the weight of Marcus's confession, a confession that had begun as simple honesty but now lingered in her chest like a quiet storm, stirring emotions she had long ignored or pushed aside, emotions tied to loyalty, longing, and the fragile, complicated nature of love itself. She reminded Marcus gently but firmly of her life, of Noah, of the vows she had spoken and the life she had built, yet as she spoke, she felt no anger, no judgment, only a complicated mixture of empathy and awareness. Because Marcus had not come to seduce or pressure her, only to reveal the truth he had carried alone for too long, and that truth had unexpectedly mirrored corners of her own heart she had never admitted to anyone, even herself. Marcus's expression shifted subtly as she spoke, a quiet ache appearing in his eyes, a tension in his jaw, a flicker of regret that he had placed her in this impossible moment, and yet he nodded in understanding, confirming that he had no expectations, that his words were not a call to action but a release, a gift of honesty, the kind that both frightens and illuminates when it arrives in a human heart unprepared for it. Elara's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the delicate weight of recognition, the realization that feelings, even those inconvenient or misplaced, were natural, human, and sometimes unavoidable, and that acknowledging them did not mean acting on them, only honoring their existence, allowing them to teach lessons she could not have learned otherwise. She thought of Noah, lying somewhere miles away, unaware of the silent emotional storm brewing in her absence, unaware that the woman he loved was standing here wrestling with reflections of desire, connection, and unmet needs that had quietly accumulated over time, and a pang of guilt mingled with clarity, because love required honesty not just between two people, but within oneself, and ignoring these stirrings could silently corrode the heart more than any confession ever could. Marcus spoke again, softly this time, almost hesitantly, explaining that he had admired her for months, noticing not only her kindness and composure but the subtle intelligence and resilience she displayed, qualities that often went unseen in daily life, yet had captured his attention quietly, persistently, like a song lingering in memory long after the music stops, and Elara listened, feeling a warmth that was neither dangerous nor inappropriate but profoundly human, a recognition that someone saw her entirely, beyond the surface, beyond the routine, beyond the expectations of others. She realized then that his words had not created temptation, they had created awareness, a mirror held gently to her own emotions, reflecting the gaps, the longings, the quiet corners of her heart she had left unexamined while life moved steadily on around her. And she felt both vulnerability and empowerment, The delicate balance of knowing the truth of her feelings while still honoring her commitment to Noah and the life they had built together. As she absorbed his words, she noted the subtle gestures he made, the careful way his hands rested on the desk, the small nods he gave when he sensed her reaction, the measured pauses that conveyed thoughtfulness and respect rather than impatience or urgency, and she felt a profound respect for the courage it had taken for him to speak so openly, in a space that was both professional and unexpectedly intimate, and under circumstances that demanded both discretion and sincerity. The city lights outside cast long, shifting shadows across the room, reflecting off his polished desk and the faint sheen of her own eyes as she blinked away the tears she had not expected, and in that quiet, illuminated space, the magnitude of the moment became clear. This was not about betrayal, or desire, or crossing boundaries, it was about human emotion in its raw, honest form, about connection and recognition and the courage to speak when silence had become heavy with unspoken truths, and Elara felt the weight of that courage pressing gently against her chest, demanding reflection, compassion, and clarity. She shifted again, instinctively moving closer to the window to gather her thoughts, feeling the cool glass against her fingertips, and realized that this night, this revelation, would leave an imprint on her heart whether she chose to acknowledge it or not. Because human emotion, once recognized, could not simply be ignored or erased, it lingered in subtle ways, shaping perception, perspective, and understanding in ways both quiet and profound. Marcus's voice, calm yet infused with unspoken emotion, continued to guide the moment, noting that he had wrestled with the timing of this confession, aware that revealing it could be disruptive, yet believing that honesty, even in delicate, imperfect doses, was always preferable to the slow erosion of secrecy, and Elara felt her own pulse quicken at the quiet intensity of his admission, because it was not the words themselves that struck her, but the sincerity behind them, the recognition of a human heart daring to speak despite fear, restraint, and the certainty that emotions could complicate life in ways no one truly anticipates. She thought of all the moments she had brushed aside in her marriage, the evenings when Noah had been distracted, exhausted, or preoccupied, the small silences that had crept between them like unnoticed shadows, and the longing she had tucked away in the quiet corners of her own heart, feeling for someone who might never notice, someone who might never respond, and she understood suddenly that Marcus's confession was not just about him. It was about revealing what is possible when hearts are honest, when emotions are acknowledged, when human connection is allowed its fragile, authentic space, even amidst life's constraints. Tears pricked at her eyes, not from guilt or shame, but from the recognition of her own complexity, her own humanity, the way longing, admiration, and quiet attraction could exist alongside love, loyalty, and commitment without undermining them, and she felt a sudden, startling clarity that emotions are rarely simple, and that acknowledging them is not weakness but courage, a courage she had witnessed tonight in the quiet strength of Marcus Hale, a man she had known only professionally yet had just revealed the depth of his humanity in a way that could never be forgotten. She leaned back slightly, letting the chair support her as she processed the torrent of feelings, noticing the subtle changes in his posture, the slight furrow of concentration, the careful choice of words, and realized that he had created a space where honesty could exist without judgment, where vulnerability could coexist with respect, and where hearts could meet in understanding even when circumstances demanded restraint. Marcus paused once more, giving her the space to reflect, to breathe, to decide how to respond, and in that pause, Elara felt the quiet power of the moment, the almost sacred nature of truth spoken without expectation, the delicate, emotional tension of hearts communicating across unspoken gaps, and she understood that this moment was both gift and lesson, a chance to recognize what was hidden within her own heart and to honor it without betraying the life she loved, without acting impulsively, without misunderstanding the true purpose of connection. The office, dim and quiet except for the soft hum of the city beyond the windows, became a cocoon of sorts, a place removed from time and ordinary life, where she could sit with her emotions, with her reflections, with the fragile, trembling awareness that she had just witnessed something rare, a confession not born of selfish desire, but of honesty, of courage, of recognition, and she felt both gratitude and awe, her own chest heavy with emotion, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve as she realized that she had learned more about herself, about love, and about the delicate complexity of human hearts in the past hour than she had in months of quiet domestic routine. She thought again of Noah, of the life she had promised him, and of the love that remained steady yet silent, and she understood that Marcus's words had not created temptation, they had created reflection, a mirror held gently against her chest, showing the spaces she had ignored, the emotions she had hidden, the yearning she had silenced, and the quiet longing she had never fully acknowledged. As the night deepened and the office remained still, she felt the edges of tears slide down her cheeks, unbidden yet not unwelcome, because they marked the recognition of truth, not the unraveling of it, and in that recognition, she felt both sadness and clarity, empathy and understanding, and an awareness that human hearts, in their quiet, intricate complexity, often need only acknowledgement to feel lighter, freer, more present. Marcus's eyes met hers once more, steady, sincere, and filled with unspoken understanding, a silent communication of trust, respect, and human fragility, and she realized that this moment, delicate as it was, would linger in her memory far longer than she could yet imagine, shaping the way she viewed love, connection, honesty, and emotional courage in ways both subtle and profound, leaving her heart quietly, irrevocably changed, aware of longing, awareness, and possibility in the tender, mature way that only the quiet honesty of human emotion can teach. And as she rose from the chair, feeling the weight of reflection settle on her shoulders, she understood that this night, Marcus's words, and the honest truth they carried would continue to echo in her mind, guiding her toward understanding, compassion, and clarity, preparing her for the choices she would soon face, and reminding her that sometimes the deepest connections are those that are acknowledged in silence, reflected upon in stillness, and honored in the quiet, fragile, yet profoundly human spaces between hearts. Alara stepped out of the office building into the cool night air, the city lights flickering and casting soft reflections across the wet pavement, and she felt a mixture of relief, confusion, and quiet clarity that pressed against her chest with the gentle weight of revelation, a weight that made her aware of every step, every breath, and every lingering emotion stirred by Marcus's confession, because though nothing improper had occurred, though no boundary had been crossed, something fundamental inside her had shifted, an awareness of herself and her life that could not be ignored, a recognition of longings she had brushed aside, a mirror held up to her heart that demanded reflection, courage, and honesty. Her heels clicked lightly against the pavement, echoing in the near-empty streets, and she felt the night enfold her in its quiet intimacy, as if the city itself had conspired to give her space to process, to breathe, to let the emotions settle, to let the quiet storm within her calm into something comprehensible, something she could carry home without fear or shame, something she could hold tenderly as she considered what her life, her marriage, and her future truly meant. She thought of Noah, her husband, whose love had been steady yet quiet, whose presence had become familiar to the point of routine, and she realized that Marcus's words had not created temptation but reflection, a mirror showing her the gaps in her own attention, the silences she had tolerated, the subtle longing for recognition and connection she had ignored while busy with life, chores, and obligations, and she felt a pang of sorrow mixed with determination, because now she could see that love required effort, awareness, and courage, not just habit, and that ignoring the quiet stirrings of the heart only led to distance, even when love remained. She walked faster, needing to move, needing to feel the ground beneath her feet, and as she did, her mind replayed every nuance of the conversation, Marcus's gentle tone, the care in his words, the honesty without expectation, the subtle vulnerability he had allowed himself to reveal, and she understood that this moment had been a gift, a chance to see her own heart in a clearer light, to recognize that feelings, longings, and admiration did not have to conflict with commitment, but could illuminate what was missing, what was unspoken, and what still needed nurturing in her life. Her thoughts drifted to the way Marcus had noticed the little things about her, the patience in her voice, the warmth in her presence, the quiet strength she carried without fanfare, and she felt an unexpected appreciation for his courage, for the way he had chosen to speak without forcing her into a choice, without imposing on her life, simply offering honesty as a reminder that human hearts, when acknowledged, could lead to understanding rather than chaos, and that sometimes the mere recognition of truth could shift perspective in subtle, profound ways. The night air carried the faint scent of rain and exhaust and the hum of distant traffic, blending into a soft, reflective soundtrack for her thoughts, and she realized how much she had taken for granted the rhythm of her life, the quiet moments with Noah, the steady love they shared, and how easily the gaps between hearts could grow if attention and honesty were left unattended, because even small silences, left unchecked, could create spaces for longing, doubt, and unspoken desires that neither party may fully understand until someone finally speaks, and she recognized that Marcus had simply spoken before it was too late, before the weight of unacknowledged truth could burden anyone unnecessarily. She remembered the tremor in her chest as he had shared his feelings, the way her own emotions had responded not with rebellion but with empathy, understanding, and the bittersweet recognition of human complexity, and she understood that life, love, and marriage were rarely simple, that hearts could hold multiple truths simultaneously, and that acknowledging feelings without acting on them was not weakness but clarity, courage, and emotional intelligence, a lesson she would carry forward with care. As she approached her car, parked under the soft glow of a street lamp, she paused for a moment, letting the night wrap around her, feeling the subtle ache of reflection in her chest, realizing that the confession had not been an invitation to something forbidden but a reminder to nurture what truly mattered, to pay attention to the quiet spaces in her own marriage, and to honor not only her own heart but Noah's, whose love was steady, familiar, and worthy of care, attention, and renewal. Driving home, the city lights blurring past her window, she let her thoughts wander gently through the evening's revelations, considering how small gestures, quiet recognition, and heartfelt honesty could alter perspectives without demanding action, how courage sometimes meant simply listening, reflecting, and learning, and how love, in its truest form, required awareness, patience, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths with grace. She imagined Noah at home, perhaps unaware of the storm of emotions and reflections she carried now, and a sense of tenderness and renewed commitment grew quietly in her chest, because she knew that the most profound lessons of the night were not about another person but about herself, about understanding her own needs, her capacity for empathy, and the gentle power of recognition, honesty, and care in human relationships. As she opened her front door and entered the quiet of her home, the familiar warmth and scent wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, and she watched Noah sleeping peacefully, his face calm, and her heart swelled with love, awareness, and determination, because she knew that no confession, no distant admiration, no whispered truth could ever overshadow the life she had built with him, but rather, could serve as a reminder of the love, effort, and presence required to keep that life alive, vibrant, and deeply connected. She made her way to the living room, sitting quietly in the stillness, reflecting on the night, Marcus's words echoing gently in her mind, not as temptation or regret, but as illumination, a mirror of emotional truth that reminded her that hearts are fragile, love is complex, and honesty, spoken or unspoken, can transform understanding in ways subtle, profound, and lasting, and she realized that this night, though fleeting, would forever shape the way she viewed connection, emotion, and the courage to face truth with maturity and grace. The hours passed in quiet reflection, the city outside slowly slowing into dawn, and Alara felt a sense of peace tempered with awareness, knowing that life, love, and marriage are ongoing journeys requiring honesty, courage, and tender care, and that the unspoken moments, the confessions, the reflections, the quiet realizations, are often the ones that leave the most lasting impact on a human heart. She knew she would carry this night with her forever, not as a shadow but as a lesson, a gentle reminder that emotional honesty, self-reflection, and care for the hearts around us are the keys to sustaining love, understanding, and connection, and that sometimes, the most profound revelations come not from dramatic gestures but from the quiet acknowledgement of what has always existed beneath the surface, waiting patiently to be seen, honored, and understood, and she felt her heart, now calm but aware, ready to nurture the love she had, to listen, to speak, and to live with renewed understanding of the fragile, beautiful, and deeply human emotions that define connection, intimacy, and the enduring bonds between hearts, carrying forward not only the memory of the night but the wisdom it imparted, the tenderness it inspired, and the gentle, enduring truth that love requires courage, honesty, and reflection, and that these gifts, once recognized, transform life in ways subtle, profound, and everlasting, leaving her ready to embrace tomorrow with clarity, grace, and a heart fully awake to the beauty, complexity, and responsibility of love.